Welcome to the 7th video of the Introduction to IFS or Internal Family System Theory. And in this video, I want to explore this in more depth, which is the 8C's of self-energy. And I'm going to be covering the questions of what is self and self-energy, and what are the qualities of presence that go along with self. So just as a short recap from last video, we discussed two terms that are very central to IFS as a perspective, which is self and self-energy. And we looked at them as self being the seat of consciousness and the entity or the being that has certain natural qualities called the 8C's, which are going to be what we're looking at with a lot more detail in this video. So self, the being, who or what we are, in my words. Self-energy, on the other hand, are the natural attitudes and feelings towards other humans and parts that we naturally display when we are connected to self and self-energy. So basically, self is the being, the entity, and self-energy is the way it relates to others, and these 8C's are kind of somewhere in the middle there, because the 8C's are the qualities of presence, but they're also the natural attitudes and feelings. So here we're going to get to what are these, and the answer to that are the 8C's. And one way to look at the 8C's is that the 8C's are like powers of presence we possess and our deepest resources. And I want to look at these two elements a little bit. So with powers of presence, I mean that as we are connected to self or in self, as it's often termed in IFS, we have a certain way of being. It's not so much that we do a lot of things. We can also act and do, but some things are just normal and natural, like being calm, being curious, being compassionate, but we don't have to work for them. It's just who and what we are in that moment. I am curious. I am open. And the other perspective of saying that the 8C's are like our deepest resources is that this is such a deep part of us and so built into us that as we are connected with these qualities, we can do things, we can achieve things, we can deal with things we can't usually deal with when we are just in parts. So that this is really the ultimate and deepest resource we all have to deal with situations are the 8C's or self and self-energy. So let's dive a little bit more into what those are. To introduce the 8C's, I want to use a drawing that is inspired by a past participant of one of my courses. So Richard Schwartz and IFS basically watched people as they were the same person underneath when they were connected to self and self-energy, and tried to figure out what are the qualities that these people show. And they came to about 8 qualities that can name a lot of the things that go along. People are calmer, meaning where before there's a lot going on in them, as soon as they're connected to self, something calms, quiets. They are naturally curious about things. They have a clarity around stuff. This is this, that is that. And they can creatively deal with situations. They're also connected to themselves, to others, to whatever is out there. They have compassion with themselves, with parts, with other humans, and they have a confidence and courage to face situations that they might have been scared of just a minute ago. So those were kind of the 8C's, because all of these qualities that go along with C, and IFS or Richard Schwartz really like alliterations, as it seems like. And what this participant recommended was to map them onto the body centers, so onto these. And I want to talk a little bit more about those body centers. There are multiple spiritual schools, psychotherapeutic schools, coaching schools that talk about humans as having 3 body centers. And one of the ways you can look at a body center is a center that you can be and collect your awareness or your presence in. And then you will be slightly different, and you can act from those centers. And the 3 centers that many of these schools describe are belly center, more in the pelvis, more deep in the body, more grounded. Heart center, which is more connected, outgoing, and a head center, which is not the being in thoughts, being lost in the mind, but actually being in a more clear awareness. And they describe the qualities that go along with these centers in very, very similar words to the 8C's that IFS has discovered, which is why I think this way of mapping them on top of each other makes it a lot easier to remember also the different qualities of self-energy. So these are the 8C's mapped onto the body centers, and I would like to take a few moments to really go through each of them one by one. And to go through them, I want to start with calm. Calm is the only one of these qualities that I haven't mapped onto one of the 3 centers, because to me the quality of calm is not really connected to one of the centers. It's more of a general, complete state. So basically, to understand calm, you can think about it as this. Often in sessions in our life, we have so much going on inside of us. There are different voices telling us, do this. There is a vigilance of watching things. There is so much stuff we think we need to do, or we really do have to do. And the point is, when we connect to self and self-energy, so much of that just quiets or drops away. And we get more into I think there should be an A there, equanimity. We drop into more of a state of equanimity, where things are okay as they are, and where we can be with them, where a lot of the thoughts, the craziness become more quiet, and where we're in a state between activity and being, where a lot of parts are constantly doing, especially protectors are constantly doing, and self is. And we can drop into that state of being, which is inherently calm. So those are the qualities of calmness, which then brings us to the first center, the head center, and the qualities of curiosity, clarity, and creativity. So I want to go through each one of these one by one. And one way to understand curiosity as it relates to self and self-energy is that as you are connected to self, in self, and a part is doing something, a part is creating a ruckus and problems, usually the self's very natural inclination towards that is to be open. To not have an agenda that it immediately has to change, that it has to be different, but that it's rather there to be like, wow, I'm curious. I want to know why it's doing that. What drives this part? What does it try to achieve? And in that, there is a safety that the parts feel, that if self doesn't want to change, but really wants to understand, the parts can let their guard down, because they're often used to so much struggle, constantly people on the outside. We want to change our parts, and self doesn't. Self is just curious. And in addition to curious, it's often clear. And I think one way to look at clarity is that so much of the time our perception is really controlled by parts, and we see the world through the small, tiny lens that the parts see them through, but self isn't constrained to that. Self is, in its essence, non-reactive, so not in those reactive perceptions of parts, which means it can see things clearly. It can see how things are, how things aren't, not always how they should be, how they must be, but rather how they are. And that makes things so much simpler. And we are connected to reality. And I put reality into parentheses because it's not like the one reality and this is what you see then, but rather we see situations as they are. We see, yes, that's shit. And we see, oh, and this is my part in it. But we can see it much more clearly in the sense of as it is, rather than how our parts want it to be. And the third quality that goes along with the more head center element is creativity, which means that as we are connected to self, as we are in self, we can find ways of dealing with situations that are unconventional, where before we were in these and we always tried this, suddenly we can try completely different things. And that makes a lot of things a lot easier. We can problem solve in places where we were stuck before, and we will have completely new impulses, maybe coming from places where we don't even know where they're coming from. But with those impulses, we can deal with the situation differently and anew. And this is part of the inherent creativity of self-energy and self. So that's the head center, which then brings us to the heart center and the qualities that go along with the heart center. And these are connectedness and compassion. Now, going through them one by one, compassion is an essential and a core element of the whole IFS process. Compassion, not as the same as empathy, but rather as when we are in self, when we are seeing clearly, there is an element of that's happening. And along with that, as we are connected to our heart and to this heart center, there is an element of that's happening. And I feel for you. I feel for you as a human, for what you're going through. I feel for you as a part, for how much you're working and how hard you're working. I feel for myself with everything I had to go through. There's a feeling of I feel sorry for you, but not as belittling, but more as I genuinely feel sad and sorry when I see that. That's painful. That's hard. And along with that, I feel for you. I feel sorry for you. And I have an impulse to help, which is, again, it's not, I have to help and I have to caretake, but it's like if I can, I want to help. That's the natural expression. And the fascinating thing is, self can help. Self can help the parts. Self can help in our inner system. And that's what this compassion heart center is about. And this is very closely connected to connectedness, meaning that self and self-energy is connected. It's the natural state of us and of this element of us, is we are connected to ourselves, our body, other people, the divine. It's just the natural state. As we are connected. It's in there. And self is connected to that level of reality. And this deeply influences also the compassion, because if I'm connected to you and I feel what's happening for you, I can't but be compassionate. So they influence each other, and this is the more heart center element of self-energy, which then brings us to the third center, and the qualities going along with the belly, more of being confidence and courage. So not only can we see clearly when we're in self, not only do we feel compassion and connected to others, but actually from self there is a force and a power connected to that is also inherent in that state of being, in that state of presence. And that power has two faces going along, which is a confidence, which is, as we are in self, we are connected to our natural capacities, to our natural resources, and that brings a confidence of knowing, I can deal with this, I'm calm, I see clearly, I can deal with this situation. We know we are capable. And in that state, we can trust ourselves And we can trust something bigger, actually, that might help us where we are not enough on our own, but something bigger can be. And actually, that's a confidence that goes along with being in self, being connected to self-energy. And alongside this confidence, there's not just a, I can do this, but there is a courage. There is an automatic courage and a power that goes along with that to stand up for ourselves and others, to confront problems. Not just that I think I can do it, but there is a natural impulse to do it, coming from this energy, coming from ourselves. Our self has the impulse to deal with situations that it can deal with. And being connected to the natural resources, it can deal with quite a few different ones. So this is, again, a different quality. And that is where I think it's so helpful to look at self and self-energy as having these different qualities and these different centers that it is connected to. That the heart center has a different power and a different element of energy than the belly center, than the head center. And that all of them together form this capacity that goes along with self and self-energy. And that's it for this video. I hope this is helpful. If this is helpful, please feel free to share it with others, and see you in the next video.
You never know what's around the